Joe Rogan went from being an unknown to earning nearly $200 million with a deal with Spotify. But how did he get there? Born Joseph James Rogan on August 11, 1967, in Newark, New Jersey. He comes from rather simple beginnings, the son of a policeman. His parents divorced when Joe was only 5 years old, which caused a lot of trauma for young Joe's family. Apparently, the reason for the divorce was because Joe's father was abusive and mistreated the family, which made Rogan's childhood quite difficult. Once Joe and his mother managed to distance themselves from his father's grasp, they never heard from him again. Rogan's childhood was very hard, reaching moments where his father would lock him in a room and verbally abuse him. Joe himself considers his father to be a monster, which clearly indicates possible problems for the future star, such as a certain hatred towards authority and a possible need to perform insensitive acts. When his mother remarried, Joe considered his stepfather a hippie, who showed him the opposite of what he experienced with his father. In this way, Rogan had a strange retrospective in which there was no more talk of masculinity, but of love and peace. In a strange way, this served to give him a different perspective. He didn't come from a wealthy family. They were just people who lived a simple life. They used to take Joe to small comedy events, and they also allowed him to see the film by the great comedian Richard Pryor at Sunset Strip, which, in his own words, changed his perception of the world. Aside from his youth, where young Joe showed a great fondness for sports, playing baseball until adulthood and making many friends along the way, becoming quite popular. He began to dream of becoming an athlete, specifically practicing kickboxing. However, life had something else in store for him. Rogan didn't plan to start out as a comedian, which was one of his early jobs, but he had a connection to it. So Joe decided to try his luck by creating his comedic monologue to perform. While working as a paperboy and a limo driver, his life was pretty tough, but at least he had the relief of not living alone. A problem arose when Joe decided to drop out of college to pursue something else simply because he didn't like to take the hard road. After months, Rogan finally finished preparing for his first performance. But the question was, where? Joe convinced the owner of a comedy club in Boston to let him perform, and it went really well. Rogan stated in an interview, "I didn't have a direction until I became a stand-up comedian, and I was very nervous about my future. I can't see myself working a 9 to 5. Joe showed that he could do more than just kicks and punches. Rogan knew he had a future, but he really got lucky when Jeff Sussman, a talent scout, saw potential in him and took him to New York. From there, Rogan began working as a comedian, living with his grandfather because living alone was quite expensive and he hardly earned anything per night. In fact, his money barely lasted a week. A few years passed, and Joe tried his luck in Hollywood as a comedian, but with the intention of appearing on television. Joe managed to get a few roles and joined a Disney-produced comedy series that didn't go very well, to be honest. But there he was, gaining a bit more notoriety. At least Joe got a role in the NBC series News Radio, but it wasn't something he was passionate about. In his own words, "I just did it for the money." His career as a comedic actor ended with the death of Phil Hartman, who was killed by his wife. Rogan looked up to Phil Hartman, who he considered a comic genius, and took his death very hard. After that, he turned to something new. Joe decided to distance himself from comedy altogether and focus on interviewing people at sports events. Once again, he would return to his roots. Joe had practiced some martial arts in his youth, and apparently it was something that interested him, so he decided to give it a try. What Joe earned was barely acceptable, but it worked. He had to live quite poorly during those years. Let's say it was one of the hardest times. But Joe still liked to stay involved in the sport. It was a passion he had. But when his earnings were so low and he was about to give it up, that's when Joe managed to befriend Dana White, the president of the UFC, who hired him. Even in his early days as a commentator, according to Dana White, Rogan did 15 shows for free without having the large sum of money he has today. Joe worked for Warner Brothers. He managed to create some television series, and his highlight was in '99 when Joe got his own show The Joe Rogan Show. Everything seemed to be looking up for him, because from that point on, with the arrival of the 2000s, we would witness the rise of his star and his beginnings as a millionaire. From 2000 to 2010, Rogan released several hits that began to catapult his fortune. Did you know he made a song called Voodoo Punani? Moreover, Rogan was featured in the Hollywood spectacular Blockbuster in 2003 as the Master of Ceremonies, and the best part was that he managed to host the 5th season of The Man Show.
What a nice toast, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Salud!
On Comedy Central that same year, all while dating an actress named Jerry Manthe. Joe was at the peak of his career, but it wasn't until a few years after establishing himself, most likely having more than $1 million in wealth, that some problems started. You might recognize the name Carlos Mencia. Yes, the notorious plagiarizer. The man whose shows are characterized by stealing content from other comedians. One of them being Joe Rogan, sparking his first controversy, a feud that lasted until 2007, where they clashed figuratively. And obviously, it was a total humiliation for Mencia. But speaking of clashes, while they were exchanging jokes, on the other hand, Rogan challenged to really exchange blows with actor Wesley Snipes, starting a second controversy during the same year as the Mencia feud, not a significant one for the comedian. And after months of preparation to step into the ring, Snipes withdrew. Well, he was withdrawn, as he was under investigation by the IRS. But the positive side is that Rogan made good money from the controversy. Also, to the surprise of many, Joe Rogan got married shortly after all these problems to his then partner Jessica, with whom they had a daughter, officially moving to California. But did you know that his partner had a daughter from a previous relationship? Yes. So Rogan also took on the role of stepfather, and fortunately, he remained a present father. This brings us to the year 2009, where the internet-famous Joe Rogan was born, i.e. the comedian's superiority taken to the maximum, and where it can truly be considered that he became a public figure, and at the same time, his moment when he became famous. Rogan and Brian Redban decided to create their own podcast, initially with a provocative name. In 2010, it became known as The Joe Rogan Experience, and finally, a golden era for the content creator would begin. Through his online presence, he would truly begin to amass his true wealth. The Joe Rogan podcast made it into the top 100 podcasts on iTunes, with over 16 million downloads per month, covering a variety of topics including comedy, politics, sports, controversy, and much more. After several years of doing this, by 2018, he had amassed a fortune of $30 million according to Forbes magazine. Not bad at all. However, on the other hand, Rogan has not been exempt from controversies, and no one is going to hide them. Well, it was inevitable that we'd talk about this topic, as he's made some comments that weren't gentle at all, starting with what happened in 2020 when there was a wildfire in the forests of Oregon. Rogan openly stated that Black Lives Matter protesters and anti-fascists intentionally provoked clashes with the police in Portland, which led to a wildfire. This situation led to some of these protesters starting the fires, and the authorities were forced to arrest them. In short, he suggested that the left started a fire in Oregon. Was this true? No, because the FBI said it was nonsense, and Rogan had to apologize for his words, which promoted hatred and misinformation. Then we get to 2020 and 2021, where, well, everyone should already know what happened back then, and Rogan's anti-vaccine stance. He said that young people should avoid vaccinations, all because of conspiracy theories about these types of substances, and because they could alter genetics, among other things, which obviously sparked controversy. But the culmination of all this was when Rogan contracted COVID-19. Instead of treating it the normal way, he started a rather annoying trend that haunted the internet for a while. He said the cure was an injection of ivermectin. Yes, you must remember those moments when the internet went crazy with people saying it was right for a horse heart medicine to cure COVID. Although he stood by his words and said that several doctors told him to do it, but let's leave aside some controversial or rather absurd, things and talk about a controversy on the level of J.K. Rowling, when Joe harshly criticized Fallon Fox, a transgender MMA fighter, because it was unfair that she was allowed to fight after the gender transition process. Since it was a gray critique, it ended up causing divided opinions on the matter. Currently, Rogan has distanced himself a bit from controversy, even during the pandemic. Thanks to the boom in content creation and podcasts, his fortune has increased significantly, and he has amassed a fortune of $120 million. In addition, Spotify, looking to expand even further, has signed him to a $250 million contract extension. From humble beginnings to becoming a millionaire through problems, difficulties, and controversies, Joe Rogan's journey is admired and revered as one of the most inspiring stories worth telling. He went from being a poor man to having a net worth of over $120 million. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.